A liberal producer publicly insults a Christian cameraman. Then Mel Gibson enters the set. The studio was buzzing. Spotlights flickered, cables crisscrossed the ground, and people rushed from one end of the set to the other. Actors, makeup artists, directors, all doing their part to make Kingdom Division, a sci-fi war film, look like the next box office hit. And at the edge of it all was Matthew, a quiet, hard-working cameraman in his early 30s. He wore worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and a silver cross around his neck. He didn't say much, but he always showed up early, stayed late, and never missed a beat. Everyone knew him as the guy who doesn't talk back. Until one day, he didn't need to. It was during a lunch break when the incident began. Matthew was seated alone in the corner, quietly blessing his meal, when Rachel Blake, the high-profile liberal producer behind the film, walked past with a group of execs. She stopped mid-conversation and turned to him. "Are you praying?" she asked, loud enough for others to hear. Matthew looked up. "Yes, ma'am. Just a quiet—" "No, no," she interrupted with a sharp laugh. "We don't do that here. Keep your personal beliefs to yourself. This is a professional space, not a church picnic." The crew fell silent. Rachel turned to the others. "This is why we need new hiring filters. We can't have backward superstition affecting the tone of the project." Someone chuckled nervously. Most looked away. Matthew's hands trembled slightly, but he said nothing. He quietly picked up his tray and walked off. What he didn't realize was that someone else had seen the entire thing. From behind the lighting rig stood Mel Gibson, visiting the set as a creative consultant, and he had heard everything. Later that afternoon, the crew gathered on Set B for a high-stakes shoot. The tension still hung thick in the air. Suddenly, Mel walked up to the director and said, "Give me 5 minutes before the next scene." He didn't wait for approval. He climbed up onto a small camera platform, motioned for silence, and began to speak. "I want to say something," Mel said calmly, his eyes scanning the room. "I've worked in this industry for decades. I've seen egos, talent, ambition, and I've seen a lot of people lose their soul trying to chase something shiny." The room stilled. "And just today," Mel continued, "I watched a man, one of our own crew, get humiliated for simply bowing his head before a meal." Rachel's face froze. "He didn't argue. He didn't fight. But he didn't deserve that. None of us do." He gestured toward Matthew, who stood at the edge of the room, trying not to draw attention. "Faith is not a weakness," Mel said firmly. "Respect is not optional. If we pride ourselves on inclusion, then that includes those who believe, those who doubt, and those who simply want to live and let live." A few crew members began to nod. Mel turned toward Rachel. "I don't care how many awards are on your shelf. If you can't treat a man with dignity, you don't belong in charge." Rachel didn't respond. She didn't have to, because the entire room had already heard what mattered. The story exploded. Someone on set had recorded Mel's speech and shared it online. Within hours, the clip had been viewed millions of times. Matthew received messages from strangers across the world, fellow believers, non-believers, young filmmakers, and elderly war veterans. "You made me feel seen. You reminded me why I don't hide my values. You gave me courage." Producers began calling, not to talk about cameras, but to ask about his story. A week later, Rachel Blake released a formal apology and stepped away from several active projects. Matthew, meanwhile, was invited to join a new documentary series titled Faith on Set, exploring stories of belief and belonging in modern Hollywood. In one quiet scene, Matthew sat across from Mel Gibson for an interview. "I didn't mean to make a statement," he said. I just wanted to eat lunch. Mel smiled. Sometimes the smallest actions shake the biggest rooms. They both laughed. Months passed. Faith on Set became more than a documentary. It became a movement. Film schools began screening it in ethics classes. Church groups hosted viewing parties. Even networks that once ignored faith-based stories started asking different questions. Matthew was invited to speak on a national talk show. The host leaned forward and asked, "What do you think changed everything?" Matthew thought a moment. "Someone saw me," he said simply. "Someone spoke when no one else did, and it made me believe I wasn't invisible." The screen cut to Mel Gibson, watching proudly from the audience. In the final scene, Matthew stood at a film set, not behind the camera, but in front of a group of interns, teaching them the fundamentals of storytelling. One young man raised his hand. "Mr. Matthew, do you think you can change the world with a film?" Matthew smiled. "I think you can change it with a single frame, if it's pointed at the truth." The screen faded to black. Text appeared. "Real strength doesn't shout. It stands, silently, until the whole world listens."